Hey, Central Life Church. I am so glad that you're here at church today. We are embarking on a brand new journey called Summer Road Trip. And over the next several weeks, it's my honor to present to you some friends of mine, some pastors who have very, very encouraging messages and have very relevant voices in what God is doing in the church today. I think it's great from time to time for you to hear from other people, from other pastors and teachers who love God and love people. And so you're going to get just that. Starting today and the next few weeks, our messages will be presented to us on video. And that's because these pastors don't live close by. They live several hours away, and some of them across other states. But they're personal friends of mine who have chosen to invest in your life. And so I hope you're ready for it. It's going to be amazing. Today is going to be the very first, and it's coming from Pastor Josh Monty out of New Sound Church. So prepare your hearts for a message from God's Word. I love you very much, church. See you soon.
All right, so we've started, this is week one of a series that we're calling Closer. And the reality is, I don't know what your church background looks like. Maybe some of you are like me, that you didn't grow up in church. I mean, it wasn't something that was important for your family, and you maybe found it later on in life, or maybe, like so many of us, we kind of grew up in church, but we kind of had a drug problem. Like we were drugged to church, and it wasn't fun, right? Some of you'll get it tomorrow. You'll get it tomorrow. So some of us, we went, but then we got older when we could make our own choices. We went away from it, and we left it for a season, and now we started to kind of find our way back. Or maybe for some of you, you have no experience, and right now you're in here just saying, God, if you're real, I'm going to need you to show yourself, and I need to hear from you today. I don't know what your experience is, but I think that you're all here for one reason, is you're trying to figure out how to get closer. You're trying to figure out, how do you hear from God, and how do you know if you're sitting in the middle of His will, and what does worship even look like? See, the reality is, whether you know this or not, everybody in this room, your primary function, the thing that you were made for, is worship. You were actually made to worship. When God created you, that was your primary purpose. But because we were made to worship, when we don't worship God, we will then always replace it with something else. And so I wanted to take a few weeks to talk about what would it look like to live a life of worship where we maybe stopped worshiping these little g gods and started putting this big G God back in His rightful place, and then dispel some myths about what worship can look like, and try to address some questions that you may have, and then hopefully as we go through this series, give you some practical steps on how to live a life of worship. I think we can sing songs all day long, but we worship when God starts to show up first in everything that we do. And so what does that actually look like for us? The text that got me thinking about this was out of the book of Romans. Paul is writing to the church in Rome, and in the first chapter, he says it in this way. I think this is a lot of us today. This is where I spent a lot of my life personally. For although they knew God, so you went to church, you've got some background, you know He's out there. I'm not here today convincing you that God exists. Although they knew God, look, they neither glorified Him as God, so He didn't get the rightful spot, nor gave thanks to Him. So we only kind of went to God when we needed more things, like He was kind of like this celestial vending machine in the sky, like insert 2 prayers and get out a dream come true. But their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. He goes, just after a while, that's just not going to work. It's just eventually, even coming to church really isn't just going to be enough for you. There's going to be a problem. And although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. And they exchanged the glory of the immortal God, this God that made the heavens and the earth. They exchanged that glory for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles. And I read that, and I literally had the thought, I was like, man, thank goodness we don't do that. Can you imagine us worshiping birds and animals and reptiles? And then yesterday, I as I yelled at an elephant and shouted for a gator, when I get home, I'll be cheering for a falcon, that I realized birds and animals and reptiles, that we actually, probably more so than we would ever like to admit, we replace attention that's supposed to be given towards God, and we just replace it on all kinds of other things. Now listen, this is not an argument saying that you should now sell your season tickets, that SEC football is bad. No, listen, I'm going on record to say SEC football is from God. Okay? Amen. And ACC football is okay. So you got... I love college sports. I love going to, I love it. But I remember, it was not long after that I had gotten saved that I realized that it was kind of crazy. So we'd gone to a game, and I went with friends, that there's tailgating, and then there's what these guys did. They had a grill, like a full grill that hooked into the Reese hitch of their car, so into their truck. So they would back into the tailgate spot, and they hit this thing, and these two tables would pop out, and then an umbrella would swing up. Then they'd open this thing up, and we're grilling in minutes. It's amazing. And then they have this other thing, and this cable TV is up, and then they got food that they've been working on for days. Days they've been preparing, because how many of you know chili is good, but chili 2 days later is blessed and highly favored. And so they've been working on this chili for days, and then they got wings, and they got food, and they got snacks, and then these guys would get out there at 8 o'clock in the morning for a 7 o'clock p.m. game. And they get all set up, and they've now begun the process of painting their bodies to let everybody know that there is a team that they celebrate above all other teams in the world. And then they go inside to a place where the sun has now cooked this entire bowl of humans up to about 193 degrees. And then these humans that are now full on chili and various forms of meat begin the process of screaming and shouting and crying and weeping at 18-year-olds in spandex pants. Birds and animals and reptiles. And I remember sitting there thinking, I've never seen this kind of devotion show up in a place that would matter. And I just wonder what it would look like for us to just be real honest, that there's probably a lot of places in our life where we've exchanged this big G God for these little G gods. And it's tough, because the reality is, it's not that any of those things by themselves are bad. I love it. I love it. I think a lot of times that football stadiums probably look a lot more like churches that God would want than a lot of churches do. It's every kind of age in the world, and every kind of race in the world, and every kind of socioeconomic background in the world all mushed together in one big bowl that they can seem to find harmony around one idea. Wouldn't that be amazing that our churches would look that way? But we just can't replace the worship of the big G God with a bunch of little G gods. And so we do it all the time. And the reality is, I want to do this series because we need help. We need help, because you were made to worship. And so your life is always going to look like a counterfeit version of the real one that God made for you if we don't get the worship thing in our life right. So where are some areas? So I thought we need help. This is our distress signal. What are some areas where we're in trouble? Let me give you SOS. Let me give you the things where I think we're in distress. The first are just substitutions. We're just substituting constantly God as the primary source of our focus and our attention for just a bunch of other little things. I remember I went to India. I flew all the way across the world, and it was an amazing trip, and I'd never been before. We flew to London, and then from London to Bangalore, and then Bangalore, a 10-hour drive through the mountain. It's raining, and you're through the mountains, and there's like a bazillion cars, and everybody's like, meek, 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 like here, and say I grew up in the South, so I'm having to get used to driving in South Florida, because in the South, if you honk at me, then I have an obligation to put my car in park, get out, and say something about your mom. Because why'd you honk at me? That is so rude. Well, down here, it's more like, time to go, don't forget, quit looking at your phone, there's the light. Well, you would love, if you're from South Florida, you would love driving into India. It would just, because everybody just beeps, coming around you, beep, beep, coming around, love you, have a great day, beep, beep, beep. They just beep all day, they just beep. They're not mad at each other, everybody's just smiling. Beep, 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 beep. Nobody's mad at each other. So then I get all the way down there, and then I go to this house, and I remember thinking, as I learned that there are billions of gods, these little g gods, billions, with a B, billions. And I went into this one house, and you could tell that this was a god. Some of them are statues that are 2 feet tall, some of them are 2 stories tall, and some of them are the size of a coffee cup. But there's billions of them, and I went into this one house, and there were these mats kind of around in a circle, and you could tell the entire house was shaped and sent, like where this God was the focus of the whole house. It would seem that the whole house had actually been constructed to support the worship of this one thing. Now, I asked them what it was, and the lady actually told me that it was her mother. Her mother died last year, and now she's a god. And so we worship her deceased mother, and that's what we're doing. And I remember thinking when she told me that, I thought, God, that's so sad. I said, oh, man. And then they've centered their whole family around this thing that has no power to change their life. And I went home, and I was just kind of a little beat up. And then I walked into my house. And there was a bunch of people over that day. And they were all sitting around a circle. It would seem that all of the furniture in that home was all set up to focus on this one thing. This, just like that idol in India, this one man-made image that we had then even gone as far as to hang on our wall. And 8 people sat with all of their focus on this TV screen that hung in the center of my house. In fact, if you look at my house, even right now, it would appear that we constructed the entire thing so that that black box would be the center of the focal point of our home. It's not even an afterthought. Every piece of furniture, the whole orientation of the house is looking at this thing. And I thought, man, I'm over in India judging people for centering their whole life on something that has no ability to impact them. And then I come home and find out my house has been constructed in the same way. Now, I haven't moved it yet because I still like my programs, but I still got 2 more seasons left to finish Doogie Howser. I'm doing a lot of throwback stuff right now. But we substitute a lot. There are substitutions for this thing. Do you know the average American spends 300 minutes a day watching TV? That's hours every single day focused on this little g thing that's not going to be able to impact your life. It's not going to change the world that we live in. In Jeremiah, it says, thus says the Lord, Jeremiah 10, learn not the way of the nations. He's going, guys, you can't look at the world and define and decide how to live your life because they're not getting it right. And so we've got to figure out how to get it right. And don't be dismayed at the signs of the heavens because the nations are dismayed at them. Listen, because the custom, it's going to be very customary. The customs of people are vanity, self-focus, where I'm the center of attention. He said that's going to be the custom, so you can't look at the world and decide how to live your life. A tree from the forest is cut down and marked with an axe by the hand of a craftsman. They decorate it with silver and gold. They fasten it with hammer and nails so that it cannot move. Their idols are like scarecrows in a cucumber field, and they cannot speak, and they have to be carried, for they cannot walk. Do not be afraid of them. He said, listen, they're not evil. Your TV is not evil. SEC football is not evil. Your computer is not evil. He said, don't be afraid of them. They're not evil. They have no inherent morality. But then he goes on to say, but neither is it in them to do any good. So we need to just recognize them for what they are. They're not evil, but they're probably going to rob you from your best life. So we have substitutions. And we make them all the time. I see it happen in families where, like dad, you always wanted to grow up and you were going to be like the world's greatest baseball player. Turns out you can't hit a curveball. So now vicariously through your son, we're going to raise him up to be like the next Barry Bonds. And so I know people in my life that are living in squalor, that have nothing, but they'll spend $2,000 on a baseball tournament. And you just go, man, you're just substituting something that could actually change your family for something that's just this little g God that by itself is not evil. It only becomes evil when it takes precedent over the thing that could actually set you free. And so he says, just don't substitute. Just be careful for that. And I just wonder, is there anything in your life that you would never allow God to take away? If he said, listen, I'm just going to ask you, no more football. You're like, well, then I'm out. Then I'm out. No more golf. I'll see you later. And I just wonder, is there anything that's getting that priority? One of the other things, so if we continue in this thought, this kind of SOS, we need help, we got substitutions, but then the other thing that I think we replace in our worship is others. Like we're just really concerned with what other people think about us. And it has this grip on our mind. I'd love to tell you that I don't worry about this as much as I actually do. I actually do. I change shirts. My wife will attest to this. I went in and out of our closet this morning like 10 times. And I was like, I don't like that shirt because, it kind of makes me look a little fat. I'm in a bulking phase, which I'm very comfortable with right now. I'm just in an overall bulking phase. But I was like, but I don't want to look, but I want to look cool, but I don't want to look like too cool. And then I'm like, yeah, but like, what if people start showing up and then they're like a little older and they're like, I don't want to listen to this 8-year-old preach in his little cool clothes or whatever. And so maybe I should wear a button down. Then I put a button down on and I'm like, but it's like 973 degrees in that thing. And I'm a sweater. I'm a classic sweater. And then I'm going to be up there just sweating in front of everybody. And then my shirt's going to be all wet. And if I don't wear a black shirt, if I wear a gray shirt, then everybody's going to know I'm a sweater because it's going to show them. It's going to look like I got an icicle in a headlock while I was sitting up here and just sweating all over the place. And I'm just like, I can't play. And so finally I was like, I just grabbed a t-shirt, put it on, and walked out of my house dejected. Because I was so worried about what you were going to think about what I had on. But the reality is you don't care what I have on. You know why? Because you've been thinking about what you got on. The problem is we make everybody else an idol, but you weren't thinking about my hair while you were fixing yours this morning. But so often we can substitute the opinions of others, and we're so worried about what somebody else is going to think. In John chapter 12, Jesus kind of addressed the problem that he saw. He said, at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him. And John said, but because of the Pharisees, they would not confess their faith for fear they would be put out of the synagogue. So they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. He said they believe. So some of you have actually come to New Sound and you weren't ever before, but now you're one of those Jesus people, right? And so and you would love, and you love the sermons. You've even started listening to some of the music. You haven't downloaded the songs yet, but you've been switching the radio station every now and then to listen to some of the Christian kind of song. You're kind of letting it influence you a little bit, and you might even started downloading a podcast or re-listen to something, or at least going on Facebook and finding the link. But then when we get around the water cooler at work, and the dirty jokes start flying or the gossip starts going, we don't stop it because we're kind of nervous about what it's going to look like when I tell you, hey, guys, I appreciate, and listen, I'm sure, Bill, I'm sure you made the jump just fine. Like I'm sure you were amazing when you were got drunk and jumped off that rock this weekend. That's amazing. That's not important to me anymore. That's not important to me anymore. See, there's actually Actually, I went to this middle school gym, okay? Yeah, just hear me out. And this guy looked super good in his t-shirt, and I was like, hey, listen, what happened is I went into this middle school gym, and everybody was super nice to me, and for a moment, I let my guard down. And while I was sitting in there, I actually found out that I was made on purpose and for a purpose. They actually explained to me that God has plans for my life, and his plans for me are good, and I kind of just want to start stepping into that now. And it feels like in my spirit, as I'm listening to you talk, that this conversation is probably outside of that plan. But we're scared to death to do that, because then we're going to be kind of that weird Jesus guy at work. And I do need you to know that there is a way that you can make a beautiful stand for God, both in your workplace and in your school, and not be a weirdie. That's what we're trying our best to model around here. That like you can like still be fun and still be funny and still be engaged and still have great friends and have a great, fun, exciting, amazing life, but then just passionately let the world know that Jesus, you made a stand for me, so I'm going to make a stand for you. So, but we're so worried about the praise of others that sometimes we let that opportunity go. And then the other place is self. I think sometimes the one place that we worship at the altar the longest is in the mirror, right? Like there's not a thing that gets more attention than us in our life. I mean, you don't care if somebody down the street went hungry today, but we gonna get our 3 meals in, right? Because we're always focused on us. And I'm an advocate of taking good care of yourself. I think it is not a liability for ministry, it's your credibility for ministry. But we can't stay the focus. But I learned a long time ago, people left to themselves will make it about themselves. We will make it about us. There is a gravitational pull to self-centeredness. If you don't believe it, you don't have children. Right? First word out of my kid's mouth, I have 4 of them. First one, no. They learned that. Who taught you no? Well, he's probably you, because you've been saying it every day since I was born. No. And then the next word they learn is mine. Mine. No, mine. No, mine. Because they're selfish little gremlins. That the thing that they worship is self. That as long as they have their bottle and their blanket and their show, and you're doing it their way, and they get the car, and they get some money for gas, and they get, then everything is good, because we worship so often at the altar of self. Hebrews says, through Jesus, though, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise. A sacrifice then implies that I'm not going to make it about me, because I never sacrifice when I feel like it. I'm going to turn my attention off of me, and God, I will worship with my life and my actions, even when I don't feel like it. In fact, the true worship actually comes when there's sacrifice involved. So, but my praise to God, though, then isn't about whether I feel like it, but I see a couple of things happening in church. There's a couple things, and I just want to go after them. I'm going to kind of poke the bear a little bit, and you can get mad at me a little bit, but that's okay. The first is spectatorism. Like, it's just this idea that, like, we're here to observe everything that's happening. And so I see it. I've seen it for years. Like, the word says, and the psalmist wrote, clap your hands, all ye nations, shout to God with cries of joy. I'm going to teach in a couple of weeks. There are 7 Hebrew words for praise. We have one word for praise. I'm going to teach you what those words are, and to show you that we're missing a lot as it would come to our worship to God. But a lot of it just comes with this idea that, like, so you have a messed up mentality where you're like, I'm not clapping for them. I'm not clapping for them. Like, because they should just be worshiping for God, not for the praises of man. Well, they're not up here for the praises of man. Nobody shows up at 5 a.m. in the morning to practice and get ready in a church plant, like, for the crowds. So when we clap, I'm not clapping because I'm saying, you are amazing and I love you. We're clapping because we say, God, you're worthy of praise. Clap your hands, all ye nations, raise your voices with joy. So I say, God, thank you, because, God, you could have done anything you wanted to, but you built me with my own percussion instrument. We know that. We know it because we do it all the time. The joke was funny. Oh, yeah. Great job, comedian. The concert was great. Great song, Bon Jovi. He scored a touchdown. Great job, Roll Tide, right? Like we got all, like we know how to praise. We know how to praise by clapping our hands, but then we take it away from the church, and here's why. Tradition. Because you were raised with the understanding that if you spoke in church, your mom was going to kill you. Right? You ever been asked that? Do we need to go to the bathroom? Huh? How many mamas, just quick show of hands, how many have you ever said that to a child? Don't we miss that? We miss it, don't we, parents? Like, we live in 2018 where you can't take a small child to a bathroom at an Outback Steakhouse and wear them out. It's a shame. If my mother looked at me and said, do we need to go to the bathroom? That meant thunder was getting ready to be rained down on you in ways that you could only have ever dreamed about if you don't shut your mouth immediately. So in church, we were actually trained that even though there was something happening inside of us where we wanted to say amen, where we wanted to clap, even maybe for some of us where we just wanted to raise our hand and say, God, thank you for what you're doing. We just felt imprisoned by tradition. I need you to know, and we're going to look at it over the next 2 weeks, that what we call contemporary worship, which is, the guitars and the electric guitars and the keys and the drums, what we call contemporary worship is actually traditional worship. It shows up throughout the entire Bible. And what we call traditional worship is actually pretty young. And I'm going to try to help our church understand why it's so important to have traditional worship. Listen, I love tradition, but not at the sake of worshiping the way we worship over the God that we worship. So I don't know what's going to happen over the next 25, 30 years. I mean, the reality is, my kids are going to grow up. Hopefully, God willing, my son will maybe feel called to maybe take this church from me 35, 40 years from now. Who knows? Wouldn't that be amazing? And then he comes in and he's like, Dad, we don't do drums anymore. And it's only guitars. It's just all guitars. It's a 7-guitar band. And then I'm going to have to wrestle with this idea of, yeah, but in my day, we loved God. And so we kept our keyboards flat, not around our necks like you heathen generation. And I'm going to have to wrestle to the ground. Do I worship God or do I worship the way I worship? And for me, all I desire is to be close to Him. And the only thing better than drawing close to my Heavenly Father is making a way for other people to do the same. And so sometimes we're sacrificing a generation on the altar of tradition. And God's saying, hey, worship me, not the way that you worship. So what does God really want? Let me give you a few things and we'll close. The first is to thank Him with my sincere affection. What God really wants is for your life first to look like a thank you. So when we're worshiping in here, and you look around with people with their arms raised or singing as loud as they can, or they're just trying to say, God, thank you for doing the unimaginable and for giving somebody like me. A quick run through of my personal history, and it would be pretty easy to disqualify me for ever doing anything for God. And so when I stand on that front row before I come to preach every Sunday, it's just thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to thank Him. And then number 2, and I think this is where we got to go, I have to offer Him control of my life. There's not a greater evidence of sin than when we, as the made thing, the created thing, when we think we have a better way to live our life than the one that made us. I think the number one place to consult for how our life ought to be going is the one that made us. And so we say, God, I give you control of my life. I'm going to do it your way. That's tough, especially in our country, because we live in a world, if you ain't first, you're last. I want to be the boss. We said it when we were a little bitty kid. You're not the boss of me. You're not the boss of me. And I just want to look to God, and I'm going to say, God, I'm going to thank you for all the things you're doing in my life, and you are the boss of me. You have a way that is higher than my way. You think about things in ways that are better than I think about things. You'll care about people more than I care about people. You care about my future more than I care about my future. And so, God, I offer you control over my life. And then number 3, I've got to include him then in my everyday life. So when I wake up in the morning, this is what I would encourage you. God, I recognize that I have a tendency to replace you with things that aren't as important as you. I'll go spend 10 hours tailgating at a football game, but I couldn't tell you the last time I served. God, I recognize my tendency to replace you. And so, God, I see that there are substitutions. And then then we say, God, I recognize that other people's opinion of me still really matters to me. God, today, will you take that from me? God, and help me stand for you in my workplace and in my school, not in a way that's creepy and off-putting, but in a way that looks like a person living a thank you letter to a God that saved them when they were unsavable. And then, God, I recognize that my tendency is to be the center of my world. And so, God, in the moments where I'm not serving because I feel selfish, or God, in the moments where I didn't say that thing, or I didn't reconcile and seek forgiveness, or whatever thing that has come up, God, I just give that to you today. And just start your day. And let me tell you, it's probably not a one-time prayer. I've gotten it down now where now I only have to do it every 10 minutes. But our gravitational pull, the pull is always back to replacing the thing that we were made to worship with something that we have made to worship. So what God really wants in the end of all of this is you. He wants you. He wants a relationship with you. And in the mind of our Heavenly Father, you are worth dying for. And my prayer would be, as we go through this series, we'd begin the process of removing some of the substitutions. Maybe removing the burden we have to please everybody else in the world. And that maybe we would put ourselves in the back seat.